So I'm Gary Severson, and I'm proud to have been the instigator of your first Zoom meeting on May 23rd, 2020. And at the time, I was marooned in New Orleans with an infected cortisone shot in my knee, taking care of my son who had an infected back surgery. So we were depending on each other to get cured, but I was there for 4 months and finally got a flight out. But the airport, as you know, you could shoot cannons through the lobbies and not hit anybody. At any rate, if you've had a chance to look at my bio, there's information there about my 60-year and 2-month dealing with this issue. And like it said in the bio, I spent years teaching about the Kennedy assassination in my history classes. And I would tell my students that I started studying the assassination 2 months before it happened because I had accidentally breached security at a Kennedy speech in North Dakota, University of North Dakota. And that was the beginning of 60 years and 2 months, or whatever it is now, of trying to get some closure on what happened to me in terms of how I got a front row seat after 30,000 other people were in the way. And that's another story. But at any rate, I started, actually paying attention shortly thereafter, well, about 65, 66, 67, when a lot of researchers were making the rounds of American universities to talk about the assassination. People like Dick Gregory, for example, Mark Lane, and they were stimulating a lot of people to get involved. And it wasn't until I went to New Orleans for a teachers convention in 1988 that I really connected to New Orleans. But I didn't get back to New Orleans until 20 some years later, when my son moved to New Orleans and we started making annual or semi-annual trips to New Orleans, and he would graciously drive me around New Orleans to all these addresses that I knew of from doing research on Oswald in New Orleans. So I've got a pretty good map in my head of and it seems like that's how I learn a lot of stuff in this case, by having a geographic basis for trying to orient myself in the process of research. So from about 2011, when he moved there, till now, until 4 years ago, actually, when I left during COVID, I made about 6 trips, that lasted anywhere from a week to, in the last case, 4 months. So that's kind of the background, and let me start sharing my screen.
Yeah, share a screen button. Green icon. Yeah, green icon on.
I got it. That's it. Yep, we can see that, Gary.
Okay. I can't believe I did this 4 years ago with a more complicated presentation, but largely because Tony was such a technical wizard, I think.
I think you're being very generous there.
Yeah, click
So,
slideshow.
go.
Slideshow, then go to,
That's it, slideshow, yeah.
and then
And
it should be
from beginning, yeah. Top left, from
top,
beginning.
left side.
We just lost it.
Well, no, go back to slideshow.
That's it,
Again.
from beginning. That's the one.
There you go.
Excellent.
Okay.
Right.
That's perfect.
All right. Now, let me give a little background to what happened in 1988 when I went to the National Teachers Convention in New Orleans. Before I went to New Orleans, I had read an article by this guy, journalist. Now the screen is blocked there a little bit.
Oh, no,
No, Ron. Whoops. Ron Ridenour. He was an investigative journalist after he was in Vietnam. And as you can see in the title there, he discovered, I'll use the word discovered loosely, the My Lai massacre. He was from Arizona, and he notified his congressman, Stuart Udall, about what he had experienced at My Lai as a medic. And I called him up before I went to New Orleans and asked if we could meet at my hotel on Canal, the Marriott Hotel. And he agreed, and so we met, sat for about 3 hours, and the takeaway was not only what he thought about the My Lai massacre, which is another ugly story, but I asked him at one point, tell me about Carlos Marcello and how New Orleans operates. And he proceeded to say, the long and short of it is that if you have a scam, the Marcello organization is everywhere. You will know somebody that can connect you, and they will finance the scam if they think they can make money on it. So that kind of opened up another perspective, because it was in '88 was the first time I'd been to New Orleans. And so just as kind of a template, that provides a lot of the insights I've had into how New Orleans has been corrupted by Marcello. And Mr. Ridenour died a few years ago at the young age of 52. I don't know exactly the details. Hopefully it was, well, not hopefully natural. Hopefully it wasn't by foul play. But in a sense, I'd like to dedicate this to him, because he opened up a way of looking at New Orleans that I probably wouldn't have been able to think about without his input. Just a little bit of geographic orientation. You can see the boundaries of New Orleans. This is all swampland, alligators. This Pontchartrain Lake is connected to Lake Burgoyne and then to the ocean. So I suppose this is a brackish lake. This bridge is 32 miles across the lake and leads to the training camps of the anti-Castro guerrilla groups and Tulane's research center for, well, monkeys is what are housed there. And the experiments that Tulane University did there are, of course, part of what we know about some of the seamier sides of the assassination. Right here, you can see the word Metairie and then Kenner. These are two suburbs. The airport is about right here. But Metairie is where Marcello lived. Now, this this isn't about Marcelo, but you can't talk about New Orleans without talking about Carlos. This is a 100,000 person unincorporated area, and it's beautiful. I mean, palm trees. I don't know if anybody's been to New Orleans that's listening here, but it's a knockout. And my son lived about right here, and so I was able to roam this whole territory looking for connections to Oswald. And the question is, how did this stay unincorporated? I think it was to Marcelo's advantage to not have a lot of government telling him what to do. And so his gambling operations were largely, as I understand it, in Metairie. Now here's more of a close-up. You can see Metairie. This is the French Quarter, as the caption says. You know, it's an area. When I first saw it, I thought I was in someplace in Europe, because everything that from the 1700s has been basically kept intact. The old buildings, and just an amazing space. Number 2 here is where Adrian Alba, who I'm going to play you a recording of his interview that I made. The Canal Street, the famous street, runs right through here, and Adrian Alba interacted with Oswald at his parking garage right here. And Oswald lived in this part of New Orleans. And then number 4 here is just Lake Pontchartrain, which is a beautiful shoreline. You'd almost think you were on the ocean, but it's just a huge lake, in fact. Now this is about a 2000, I'd say 12 or 13. No, yeah, 2012 or 13. This used to be called the Crescent City Garage, and Adrian Alba owned this 2 or 3 story parking ramp. Now, I'll just tell you up front that Adrian Alba is important because, as you probably know, he attempted to help Oswald sight in his rifle in the summer of 63. And Oswald was working next door at Riley Coffee, and during his breaks he would come over, and it was really a basic parking lot, not like the big fancy ones are today. In fact, like the one that is on this spot. And you can see here, this is again about 2013, I'd say. The garage is still there, and this is the office that's been all boarded up. And when I went there in 88, I stepped into 1963. Adrian Alba had preserved every inch of that waiting room, including gun magazines on the end tables where Oswald would sit and peruse them. And, you know, I mean, that's 25 years after Oswald was in this parking ramp during his breaks. And so Adrian Alba had a real sense of history. And when I was there over the last basically 10, 12 years, this remained as if they were going to turn it into a tourist or an historic site. Now, I don't know if they have. I know now there's a huge modern parking ramp on this spot. So it'd be interesting to know if his family had enough pull to continue to keep this intact like Adrian did. There's a closer shot of course, when I was there in 88, you know, this was all windows and it was facing close to the street. this way. And this is Riley Coffee Food Company, but at the time they more than anything referred to it as Riley Coffee. And Oswald supposedly was a machine oiler. And Adrian Alba makes the comment that it sure was unusual because every time he'd come over to drink a pop in the waiting room of the parking ramp, his pants were pressed like he was in the Marines still. And how could he not have grease on him? So that, and of course, there's the evidence that since Riley is really a CIA front operation, that he really wasn't having to do much of anything in terms of maintenance on the coffee grinding machines. So this picture is from about, let's say, 2013, 14. I can't, the trips I made there from the time my son moved there in 2011 until 2020 are kind of all mashed together, but there were about 6 of them. Now this, let me see here. Yeah, this is just a kind of a random look at the 9 places that Oswald lived. And this place, also on Magazine runs all the way into where he was working at Riley Coffee. And this, of course, is the picture, which I'll show you a bit later in more detail. But, this was as an adult and maybe a couple others, but he did move around quite a bit as a kid and not a very stable background. Of course, a lot of people want to use that to make him into some kind of psychotic because he didn't have a stable life growing up. So again, this is today Riley Coffee Company, and as I remember it, it only went in '88 to about here, and then the parking garage started. This apparently is an old garage door that now isn't accessible. But William B. Riley was active in the anti-Castro goings on in New Orleans. And here's the actual present modern entrance to this ramp. And you can see these are not, this is just a parking ramp made to look like a regular building. So it's become quite a large facility, and I think the city runs it. Alba died, I don't know, I think 10 years ago, not long after I talked to him. But now this scene is about 5-6 blocks from where I was staying at the Marriott Hotel on Canal in '88. So I didn't have far to walk once I discovered where he was. So right now I'm going to cue up this cassette tape that was made 35 years ago. And the cassette is a bit shaky in terms of responding to forward and reverse. So I've picked a spot a ways into the interview that I think probably is more informative. So let me start it and we'll see if we have enough. I've tested it, so it seems like there's enough sound to go through, but let me make sure I've got the arrangement correct here. Okay.
And probably share the screen.
And the next day you saw him hand an envelope to Oswald right outside the office.
Is that hearable?
Yeah, we can hear that fine, Gary.
Okay.
Good.
That is accurate, and I understand that happened also in Dallas. I found out later, a duplicate of the same thing. the woman landlord up there saw that going on, and she saw it happen repeatedly. I think 3 times, she said.
Like an unmarked car
Yeah.
handing him something.
Mhm. See what happened when this thing happened? They sent a bunch of big shots down: Secret Service, FBI, CIA, the Internal Affairs, the Justice Department. All these big shots from D.C. came down here in these offices and knocked these men out of the way, and they took over their offices and their men. You see?
Wait a minute now. Offices in New Orleans?
Yeah, the men that were in charge of the Secret Service here was Adrian Dial, I believe.
These offices across the street from you?
Yeah. And the one that was in charge of the FBI was, I forget his name. Anyway, these men and the Secret Service, FBI, the Justice Department, CIA, etc., those men had to take a back seat to these men that came down from D.C. And there was a lot of jealousy going around, a lot of conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a man, an FBI man, that took a Secret Service car out. And I didn't want to let the car go, and he gave me the code number for the car and everything else. And did identify himself as FBI, taking the Secret Service car out. It was a green Studebaker. And that was a car that I saw when I came back from lunch, pulling up in front of the coffee plant. And Oswald coming out, dipping down, taking something out. The man's hand, putting it under his T-shirt, and going back in the building.
What'd you think?
Huh?
What did you?
Instructions or what? I don't know. Oswald got fired 3 or 4 times, I think, from William B. Raleigh. And William B. Raleigh called up and had a reputation. You get canned or get fired once, that's it, you don't come back. They had to take him back each time. Each time they took him back, they put him in a different department over there.
Was that the first incident that you thought something was fishy with Oswald? I mean, to see him actually contact with a FBI agent? Was that?
Well, I got to think on that one now. If I'm not mistaken, at the time he was arrested already for sympathy leaflets to Cuba being handed out
Oh, yeah.
on Common and Camp. And the last I knew after that, Lee Oswald told me, he says, I'll be leaving. I'm waiting for a big job out in Gentilly. It's Michoud out there, you see. It's a plant.
Uh-huh.
And I think about a week or 10 days went by, and he never stopped in or anything. He was kind of hot-footed. He turned around and he waved off to me. I said, where you going? He says, I'm going to put a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. That was supposed to be Michoud. That's the way he addressed it earlier. You know, make that big money, make those big bucks.
Michoud was the name of the plant?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Huh. So that
That was the beginning of the aerospace
Oh, yeah.
thing, I believe.
I see. So that was, you're saying that was
I
your...
think he was just playing a role, you know.
Yeah.
He wouldn't talk over the way he worked, yet over at my place he was venting himself. He wouldn't shut up.
He wouldn't shut up when he was in your place?
You know, he'd ask me questions and answer his own questions just to keep the floor. You know? So, just opposite personality.
You never met his wife?
Huh?
You never...
Really? Yeah, sure.
You did meet his wife?
Yeah, she kept going down to the garage twice that I know of, or remember anyway. Once by herself and once with her child and her landlord.
Yeah, they, in one of the, must be the book I gave you or some other place, he lived, a couple miles?
Down the line on magazines.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's in that Ladies' Home Journal article, this November issue, that she said in there that she figured something was up because one day he broke down and said he wished he could tell her what was going on, but that he just couldn't. And he was into something that he just couldn't, she didn't say he said that he couldn't handle, but the fact that he started crying told her that he was into something that
they couldn't reveal to
Yeah.
him, but he'd get much relief if he could.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what she's saying now, that she figures he didn't do it, and that
I'd like to see someone do a little more background work and search, on Lee Oswald, childhood coming up and so on and so forth.
well, this book,
Yeah, I know. They say his dad was seedy and ran a numbers game in his business. And,
well, in the book that I gave you, he says that about the uncle. And maybe the stepfather, but the father that died mowing the lawn there in the French Quarter, he apparently was pretty straight, but it's the uncle that had the numbers racket, I guess. And his mother was aware of that. And yeah, all those connections to the mob are intriguing. Well, like I say, I don't want to keep you any longer, but I appreciate your time. And
well, I just give my right arm to see the whole thing satisfy,
yeah.
not just me, of course,
Yeah.
but
Well, there's a guy in Los Angeles that wrote a book, Best Evidence, about 1980. Well, he the one that was on the show last night, the one that said that they altered the body, Lifton. Now, I read his book, and it took me about 4 or 5 years to read it, because he goes into all this.
Okay. Parts of the 32-minute tape, all but starts to do speculation, that is a bit questionable. He says that he thinks the shooter was in the sewer on Elm, and I've personally done away with that scenario, but at any rate, this is 35 years ago that he thought that, and a lot of people did, so I'm not going to indict him because he thought that. I mention a book that I gave him. So I was standing on Canal in front of the Marriott Hotel, and I looked across the street and I thought, man, this looks like possibly the corner where Oswald was passing out Fair Play for Cuba material. But I'd forgotten to bring my copy of the book from Minneapolis to New Orleans. But strangely enough, right across the street from where I was standing in front of the hotel was a Dalton bookseller, a major chain. I walked over, and here in the window was a stack of the books for $2 a piece. So I bought two, took one down to Alba's garage, and gave it to his son. I talked to his son for, I don't know, seemed like an hour. And I do this kind of walking through this area during the convention. I wasn't skipping out on the convention. It was just, there was some downtime, and I had to walk from Canal to the Superdome where we were having the convention. And it was convenient to go past places like this and see what I could scare up. Now, I want to back up for just a second. Does this show up?
The forum.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know Neil has seen the movie Fargo. Where I am in Minneapolis is about 3 hours from where Fargo is. And at any rate, on November 22nd this year, I got a call from the Fargo Forum. And they wanted to do a story on Kennedy because it was the 60th. And somehow they had run across my research about Oswald supposedly being in North Dakota back in the 50s as a kid. And so, I thought they were going to do just a short story, but it covers half the front page and then continues on page 9 on a full page. And they go into great detail about whether Oswald was in North Dakota or not. And it kind of hinges on the idea that when Elaine Mosby was given given access to Oswald when he was trying to defect in Moscow. She goes to the hotel, and he ends up telling her that my mother and I are in New York, and we decided to move to, and Elaine Mosby recorded it or scribbled it, and it was misinterpreted as North Dakota ND instead of NO.
Oh,
Well, the plot thickened because I'd say about 1987 or 8, I was in a store in downtown Minneapolis, and there was a magazine on the rack called Dallas Monthly. And it was a huge story on the assassination with Mrs. Connolly on the cover and subtitled, "Does Kennedy's Death Still Matter?" So I'm perusing it. I eventually bought it, and I saw John Armstrong being quoted about Oswald being in North Dakota. And the fairly long article with a black background with white print, quite starkly portrayed. And so I called up Armstrong to quiz him about what he thought about North Dakota's Oswald, and we were off and running. He said, "Well, you're up there. Why don't you go and look?" Well, I was actually 450 miles from the place in North Dakota, but it turned into, from 86 or 88 on into a real research project. And so this Fargo Forum story is saying that even though the Fargo Forum reporters back in 1963 discovered that Elaine Mosby had misprinted or miswritten ND, and it was interpreted or meant to write NO, but it was interpreted as ND, meant that they simply quit searching for any connection in North Dakota. But John Armstrong had discovered this connection, so I pursued it, and it was like, as they say, pulling a thread, and the whole world opens up. And I interviewed everybody that was there that had contact supposedly with Oswald, and it's another story, but it's part of my interest in New Orleans to try and understand whether or not it was a typo, because Elaine Mosby sent that memo about her interview with Oswald at the Metropole Hotel in Moscow as he was trying to defect. She sent it on a Friday, and she wanted it to be on the desk of Alan Belmont by Monday morning. Well, he was in charge of the assassination research for the FBI. So it's just a hunch. I can't prove it, but I think it was convenient to leave it as North Dakota because there were possibilities in terms of a place to frame him. And that's another story that I don't want to get into now, but at any rate, I will continue here. Now, I think you've probably all heard of this Newman building, which is just around the corner from Alba's parking ramp. And this is where Bannister and Bringuier had their offices, that Oswald ended up having an office. And this side door, either right here or right here, was an unmarked door that went up to the second floor and provided all kinds of access through the building without being obvious. These two entrances kind of serve the same deceptive purpose. I think this one is the street. Magazine is this way. This is Lafayette, and one address was something Lafayette, and the other address was something Camp. So when Oswald put Camp Street on his pamphlets that he was handing out on Canal when he got arrested, he had those stored in this someplace in his office in this second floor. So of course that this building has been long gone. It was there in 88. I remember walking over, but of course didn't have cell phones with cameras in those days. So I wasn't taking a lot of pictures then, but now even though its footprint isn't covered by another building, it's kind of a pocket park, I guess you could call it. Benches and a few trees, and there could be a plaque for all I know, but New Orleans probably doesn't want to remember, just like Dallas doesn't always want to remember it being a part of the assassination. So this is the house up Magazine a couple of miles where Oswald was living. And I frequented this place a couple times. And when I first saw it in about 2012, it was like this. Now, what's interesting is this door is a small apartment, basically a sleeping room. And I think when I was there, somebody was sitting in a chair right here. This is another entrance into another small room. And Oswald, and I don't remember the source, but he apparently would receive mail here, even though he wasn't occupying the space. So you have 3 addresses, 4905, 4907, but back here is a third entrance. And my wife and I and son walked up the driveway, and there's a stairway here. You'll see it in another picture when it turns into a law office about 7-8 years ago. And a woman greeted us, and she gave us a tour, not of these 2 rooms, but of the house that Oswald lived in. And she said when she was a kid, she lived behind this house on the street facing the other direction. But she remembers looking out the window and seeing Oswald going through trash cans with a trench coat on. Now, that was just a random memory that she had. Whether it's accurate or not is hard to tell. I went back there again in, let's say, 2015, and this time I walked up and a voice said, "Do not go any further." And there was a camera. And of course, whoever's living there, I don't think she was still living there, but whoever had now taken ownership or was renting it was probably being bugged to the point where they just didn't want anybody to come around. And so we kind of slithered away because it was a pretty intimidating voice. Now, this is today. I'd say 5 years ago when I was there, some lawyers decided to buy the property and renovate it. And I spent about an hour or so talking with the lawyer, and he and his partner really wanted to keep the floor plan on the inside close to what it was when Oswald lived there. But you can see this door is now a window, and this door is actually the front entrance into the waiting room of the law office. And in 13 or 14, I forget exactly, my wife and I went in this door and got a tour of the whole floor plan, the living room, the bedrooms, etc. And so these guys were, again, had a sense of history, and they wanted to preserve it. So this is what it looks like now. And the interesting thing is they said that when they finished, the city said, you can keep the same address or you can change it to one that's just a number or 2 off. So they said, we decided to change the address, obviously, because people were going to find them easier and they might instead go to this house, but they'd be confused and they'd give up just because they didn't want a lot of researchers coming into the lobby, and so on. So these 2 pictures are of newspapers that one of the lawyers had framed and was going to put on the wall in his office. So again, they appreciated where they were. Now this is the central corridor in the office. This, I believe, was the front. And so what the pictures I just showed, I think, were in this office. And when I told them about my research, they were interested and listened very politely. And I tried to give them obviously they wanted to know more about the history of the building, and if they could talk to people that had done some research, it would make sense. I mean, they did a great job making it into a law office. This is about a half a block away at a bar. That's my son with kind of a deer in the headlights look, I guess. Caught him off guard there. But this plaque right here says Lee Harvey Oswald sat here. So being a half a block away, it would obviously this would be a place that he would frequent. And you can barely see it. You can see Lee Harvey Oswald sat here. And you'd think somebody would have stolen it by now with a screwdriver hidden in their pocket.
What a date coin.
Still there. This is Exchange Alley or Place. And John Armstrong does a little bit with this place, but it's not just him, but a lot of people have mentioned this. And of course, this is more of a modern renovated look, but it literally is an alley about half a block off of Canal. And now it's a hotel. And this is its courtyard, part of it. And this is a wider shot. Now, I ended up staying there one night about 5-6 years ago, just by coincidence. Had no idea, because the entrance to the hotel is on the other side of the building. This is an alley, so it's a half a block to the front of the building on Royal Street. And we checked in, and it wasn't until the next morning that I thought, wait a minute, Exchange Place, apartment building. This is where Oswald stayed on the second floor when he was a kid. And so, you know, it wasn't like, I guess I walked down the hallway, but of course the place had been renovated, so there was no evidence. I assume the hallways were the same, but it's funny how things just kind of fall into place sometimes. Not that it's a hugely significant experience, but it puts things in context. And this is a look down down the alley. And I believe this is about it right here where I was standing. And a lot of the streets seem like alleys in the French Quarter. This is in the French Quarter. And this one is probably a little narrower than the streets that you see when you walk through the French Quarter. Let's see, we got about, are we about close? I've put together stuff that I'm going to use in October too, so we can quit any time for questions. But I think at 8:13, we're getting close to the point at which I've consumed 50 minutes of time, and we can start doing some questions.
Yeah, we've got about 16 minutes left, and you are obviously going to do the second part in Canterbury, Gary.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you want to cover in the next 4 or 5 minutes? Then we can open it to questions, or do you?
Well, I'll just mention this is Carlos Marcello's house, or was his house. But even though he was basically illiterate and poor when he was young, but becoming a part of the New Orleans operations, he could afford a place like this right across from a country club. But at some point, he said he got tired of the snootiness of the members of the country club, and he moved to a more average kind of place, someplace in either Metairie. This is actually in Metairie. And I was staying just half a mile from this place, so it was pretty easy to find when I did. Now this is a portrait, or not a full-blown 8x8 mural or anything, but it's about 4 feet by 3 feet, and it's a place called Southport that sits right on the Metairie New Orleans border, kind of up against the levee on the Mississippi River. But my son had a friend whose father was the head of the state police, and his son described how they would come in to Marcello's gambling parlors. These got to be feds here, and police, and they'd take all the money that was being gambled and shut down the place for a bit, but they would give half the money or some percentage of the money to Marcello, and they would keep the rest. So it was a good arrangement. He got to keep his gambling casinos open, and the police let it slide. And this is a restaurant called Impastados in Metairie, and this was one of his go-to restaurants. But the interesting thing was, every inch of the restaurant, in the lobby and in the main eating area, was covered with every picture and every celebrity you could imagine. So I said to the managers, we're waiting for our table, "Where's a picture of Carlos?" He says, "There isn't any, but here's a picture of his family." And it was kind of down behind, above a kind of just a table sitting in, small table sitting in the waiting room of the restaurant. No Carlos, but apparently this is his family. But when you would sit down and look at the menu, there were 5 dishes named after him. So figure that out.
Tomato dishes?
Yeah. So this is out in rural. This is across the Mississippi River, what's called the West Bank. And this is a little restaurant out there that he frequented, and I guess was one of his favorites, called Mosca's. So anyway, I'll leave it at that and see if I can get back.
You just close.
Let's see, how do I get back?
There should be a share button, I think, on the bottom.
Stop sharing.
Yeah. Share goes back to the share screen button, and that may well say stop sharing. I hope. Bottom of the screen. So there may be a share screen.
Ask your wife.
Is it the view options bit there? Yeah.
No.
No, at the bottom, the 3 dots.
There we go. Stop participant sharing.
There we go.
Okay.
That's it, Gary. We got it.
Well done.
Oh, okay.
We
Thank
got
you.
it. Yeah. No problem.
So, questions? I recognize quite a few of you guys
Yeah,
in the
sure.
monthly meetings.
So I didn't quite, Gary. I didn't quite get the anecdote that you were saying regarding the packages. This was occurring in a car in the garage, or in a car in the street, or on the street, and you were asserting that potentially an FBI agent or CIA agent was giving Oswald instructions or possibly cash in a brown envelope. Could you just clarify that again, please?
Yeah. Alba had a contract with the FBI and maybe another intelligence service, O&I. I can't remember exactly, but right across the street were all the federal buildings, courthouses, offices for intel agencies, and therefore he knew whose car was whose. And so, like he said, a guy shows up with the credentials he needed to take a car, an FBI car, even though he was ostensibly Secret Service. And Oswald is sitting in the waiting room having a pop and talking guns with Alba. And he's ready to go back to start his shift and walks out, and the windows give a view of the street. Now, remember, the street is really narrow. And so it's not like there's a lot of traffic or anything. And so Alba claims that he sees this yellow or chartreuse Studebaker come down the street, and he understands that is a car that's in his garage. And Oswald walks up, leans in, and the guy hands him an envelope that Alba could tell he stuffed under his t-shirt, and then walked back to Riley Coffee, which was just, 30, 40 feet away, to go back to work. So, like I said, Alba would do a lot of speculating on this tape at some points, which is the part I didn't play. But Joan Mellon, in her book, The End of Justice, I think, about Garrison, without any citation, she says that Adrian Alba was a CIA asset. I don't know. I mean, she's quite a scholar, but there was no citation for that. So what is that worth? But, here he is dealing with intelligence agencies as a place for the cars to be stored, so they're easily accessed from their offices across the street. So whether he concocted that later, or, here I am in '88, it's 25 years later from his experience. So at any rate, does that make sense, Neil?
Yeah, no, thank you for the clarification. Yeah.
Yeah,
So we've got some more questions, Gary.
Gary, hello. I just
Hi.
wanted to ask about the scope. You said that Alba helped him with his scope on the rifle, did he?
Right. Yeah.
What was it called? What was it?
Well, Alba said that he could not, even putting shims under the bracket that the scope attached to, even when he'd shim it, he couldn't get it straight enough so that it would shoot straight. And then one day, Oswald brought in 2 pieces of, I believe he said, old belts. And Alba had a way to rivet the 2 together to put the strap on the gun so that you could wrap your wrist around it like hunters do in order to stabilize your arms and the rifle in your arms. But he said when he was on the stand with the Warren Commission, or I imagine they came to New Orleans, they were right across the street, and interviewed him, he said the strap wasn't on the gun. So the strap that you see on the gun these days looks like a professional strap that went with the gun. But he said when he was trying to get the scope straight, it was just, he described it as a sloppy piece of mechanics, and you could buy them for $2 a piece at some gun shop out in suburban New Orleans. And he said when the Warren Commission handed him the gun, he said it was the same gun, even though the strap was missing, because the bolt was so sloppy that if he hadn't been holding it right, it would have just fallen out.
Oh, so that's the same rifle then that we're talking about. You're talking about the rifle.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Now, supposedly Oswald had already ordered a Mannlicher Carcano in another situation. So it's confusing as to, and you know, there's a very well-developed scenario that Oswald was working for a committee that was in 1962 trying to do something about gun control.
Yeah.
Estes Kefauver was a Democratic senator, and they wanted to see if anybody could buy a gun through the mail. And of course, he did. And so it may be that as far as Oswald was concerned, that's why because Alba said all he ever wanted to really talk about was how to order guns.
Yeah.
So, you know, doesn't mean that he wasn't being set up for a future.
This
Yep.
was before he ordered the other gun. This was before he supposedly ordered the rifle.
Yeah.
He ordered the rifle in March, was it?
March 12th.
March of 1263.
Well, he would have been interviewed in May of '64, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Gary, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you. Adrian Alba testified to the Warren Commission that he was shocked when Oswald was arrested for the assassination of the president because he said he wasn't that type of person. Did you speak to Alba about whether he liked Oswald or not?
About whether what?
He liked Oswald or not?
He never said anything negative. The most you could say that was negative was that he was I think he used the term an odd duck. And because on one hand he says he would sit in the office and talk a blue streak, and if you asked a question, he'd answer his own question. It was just like he wanted to, as Alba said, keep the flow going. You know, I don't know if you have a flow if you're talking to yourself, but he didn't. If anything, it was that he thought that he was a competent person, and met his wife and one of the babies, I guess, one day, and yeah, I think would be why he would say he was surprised when he was arrested. So,
Thanks, Gary.
anything else?
We've got a couple of minutes. Did Albert interact with Oswald in any other context or environment, or was it just in the office of the parking lot?
Yeah, like on another part of the tape, I said to him, "Your son said you went hunting with him, with Oswald." He says, "No, never." So that was the only indication that he went any place with Oswald, and he dispelled it himself. So I only can be sure about it only happening in the office. He never indicated that they were on the street talking to each other. Now the guy running Mr. Riley that ran Riley Coffee was apparently anti-Castro and was part of the right-wing New Orleans group that was the DRE and the groups that were trying to conspire against Castro. You know, is that why Joan Mellon would try to say that Alba was was a CIA asset. You know, there he is for years sitting right next to Riley's office, and he's got the FBI, CIA across the street. You know, maybe I'll find a footnote someplace where she can verify that her sense that he was an asset was actually true.
Okay.
I've got just a quick question. Gary, do you know if Oswald spoke about guns to anybody else other than Alba?
I don't think so. I mean, I would guess he did, but especially if Kefauver's committee dealing with gun control was trying to use him to find out about ultra right wing types ordering guns, but I don't know that.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
Okay. Did you ever get a chance, or did you want to interview or meet Judy Baker?
Yeah. I spent, I got a call from somebody in Seattle, a guy that I do research with, and he had been carrying on a 5-year conversation with her by telephone. And he's a professor at North Dakota, a couple of PhDs in statistics and research methods. So he's got the credentials. And he called me and he says, would you provide a safe house for Judith Baker? Well, I hardly knew what a safe house was. I mean, what do I do? Do I got to put locks and change my locks or what? So I said, okay. And I told my wife later that we were going to do that. And she's still with me. She didn't divorce me over that. But at any rate, I picked up Judith at the airport. She stayed here for 6 days. And I'd take her around to book talks and TV stations, radio stations. And, you know, I was in a position to observe what she was about. And I'm still not really clear about what's going on there. But then she came back a year or so later and she stayed here 4 days. And then she moved to a hotel in downtown St. Paul, just the city next to Minneapolis, 7 miles apart. And so she wanted me to get Jesse Ventura, you know, the ex-governor of Minnesota, to show up at her book talk. Well, you can't get to somebody like that very easily. So I'd go to a book signing at the Mall of America and just get in line. And I got up to him and I said, Mr. Governor Ventura, would you show up at Judith's book talk at Garrison Keillor's bookstore in St. Paul? And he said, yeah, I'll try. So he did show up. After her talk, we went to her hotel with Ventura's wife, myself, and Jesse, and we went up to this suite. And I said to Jesse, your son says that you had to put up with a gatekeeper in your office while you were governor for 4 years. And he says, yeah, that's true. He said, the first guy I shook hands with when I became governor was this guy that was some kind of gatekeeper. He didn't say CIA, FBI, could have been either. And he said, I'm so glad I didn't win the election for a second term because I couldn't handle that guy, you know, filtering everything that I was doing. And he said when I left, he was the last guy I shook hands with. So Jesse Ventura, as we know, is kind of off the rails. And so I don't know whether they watch all governors when they're in office or if he was a special case. But anyway, he was enamored of Judith Baker. And, you know, I've spoke at a couple of her conferences. And, you know, certain things happened there that were interesting. But you know, once you get past her foibles or her eccentricities, and that's half of what turns people off about her, I think. but she provides a lot of addresses, most of which I went to, and in New Orleans, just to, whether it was Ferry's Mouse House or other locations that seem to be significant.
Have you read Dr. Brown's book about Judith Baker?
Couldn't hear it.
Have you read Walt Brown's book about Judith Baker?
Well, I know about it. I mean, Walt and I have talked about it, and he got pretty pissed off when John Williams and I were going to speak at her first conference, I think, in New Orleans in about 13, I suppose. But there were a lot of people there, from Dick Russell to lots of people that we mostly consider legitimate. And so, if you have an opportunity, you take it. And that's what we did. And, I haven't talked to her for, probably 5 years now.
All right, Gary, thank you. We're just running very short of time. We've got the next presenter in 4 minutes. That was really interesting, and I'm really glad that you're coming back, for our seminar in Canterbury to do part 2. I think it was really interesting. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, I consider it a real honor to speak to you guys, because for a group in England, like I've said to, who was it? Anyway, it's amazing. You put out the Dealey Plaza Echo, and you do this, and you have monthly meetings. It's just really impressive. So it's a real honor to have the chance to speak to you. So thank you very much. Hopefully I'll actually get to London again. I was there and met with Bart Camp in September of 19. And he came across town with 2 casts on his feet. And I thought, wow, that's impressive. So anyway, thanks again.
Gary, we have to push on now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.